The Ottoman Empire / Turkey by Joe Rathnall and John Sarkovsky.
So before we get into the treaties that dealt with the Ottoman Empire, we're going to need some background. There were actually two treaties that broke up the Ottoman Empire after World War One: the Treaty of Sevres and Lausanne. The first one being signed in 1920 and the other one signed in 1923. And the Ottoman Empire was forced to sign the Treaty of Sevres in 1920 due to the Entente powers occupying Constantinople, the empire's capital. Similar to the Treaty of Saint Germain, it aimed to distribute the lands of the empire around several new countries seen in the bottom left map, the bottom right map. This treaty was overridden by the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923, mostly from a Turkish man named Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. A map of the treaty's territorial stipulations, which still stand today, are seen in the bottom right.
Now, both these treaties had positive and negatives toward the Ottoman Empire. To begin, let's start with the positives from the Treaty of Lausanne. Turkey was recognized as the official successor of the Ottoman Empire. There was a decrease in debts as the debts owed by the Ottoman Empire was split among all other nations created from the Ottoman Empire. A secret annex of the Declaration of Amnesty, it granted immunity to Ottoman war criminals, which would be good for them. But now on to the negatives, where there's many more. The Treaty of Sevres brought many negatives to the Ottomans, including a lot of lost land from France, the UK, Greece, and Italy. It created large occupation zones within the area, financial restrictions, which included controlled finances controlled by the Allied countries, military restrictions, which entailed being restricted to 50,000 men, a massive decrease in the size of the Navy, and a complete abolishment of the Air Force. They also saw a lot of loss of land in the Treaty of Lausanne. They lost most islands in the Aegean Sea to Greece. Now, their perspective, leaving the Ottoman people feeling embarrassed. They found great embarrassment, especially in the massive loss of land. And similar to Africa, ethnic groups were unevenly split up throughout the resulting nations, increasing tensions between allies and ethnic groups within the region. Fortunately, relations were repaired with the Treaty of Lausanne because relations between Turkey and Greece were mended.
So now onto the political impact that it had. And these treaties resulted in perhaps the most political upheaval out of any of the defeated countries. The most important effect is seen through the defection of Ataturk. He defected from the military as a result of the Greco-Turkish War raging at the time, in addition to his displeasure with the Treaty of Sevres. And it was under Ataturk that Turkey fought against the Greeks and sought to reform the Ottoman Empire, creating a new nation instead of simply breaking it up. A prominent idea at the time, demonstrated through the Armenian genocide, was to create an ethnic-based nation-state of Turkish-speaking Muslims. An important step of this process was the National Oath, a document expressing Turkey's grievances with the previous treaty. It demanded for Turkey's sovereignty and protected rights for Muslims. Ataturk was eventually successful in his efforts, resulting in the Treaty of Lausanne, replacing the Treaty of Sevres, and the nation of Turkey being created. Now, on to some more details about the specific long-term and short-term effects of the treaties. We're going to start with some short-term. In the first days after the Treaty of Sevres was signed, many prominent Turkish people believed the empire was doomed without a chance to recovery, similar to what happened in Austria after the Treaty of Saint Germain. Furthermore, peace was established between Greece and Turkey. Greece got some of Turkey's land, but Turkey kept Thrace and Anatolia, something that Ataturk was really wanting. There were restrictions on Turkey's military and economy under the Treaty of Sevres, but these were waived under the Treaty of Lausanne, reinforcing the idea that Turkey was a new nation emerging from the Ottoman Empire. Finally, there was no conclusive prosecution for the perpetrators of the Armenian genocide, regardless of the enormous death toll. Onto the long-term factors, the most significant by far was the effects from the Convention concerning the exchange of Greek and Turkish populations. It said that roughly 2.5 million people living between Turkey and Greece would be forced to move to their respective homelands, and they were not given a chance. Throughout history, other people like Adolf Hitler would use this idea to kick people and move them around other countries based on the idea of otherness. This idea would be especially prominent in World War II. Another effect was that it destabilized the Middle East. Like the Sykes-Picot Agreement, the treaty put people together that really did not want to be together, like the Kurds being given their own country, or not being given their own country. Finally, Turkey became its own independent country, both a member of the League of Nations and equal with other countries.
Now, how to make the treaty more palpable? Well, we really don't need to imagine. The Treaty of Lausanne already did that. It created an independent Turkey. It created peace with Greece. It kept the Thrace and Anatolia regions. It created an ethnic-based nation, and financial and military restrictions were waived, which means Mustafa Kemal Ataturk got what he desired, leaving him satisfied.
Now we are going to talk about how the treaties of World War I affected Germany, more specifically the Treaty of Versailles. One of the few positives that came out of this treaty in terms of Germany was that it was able to stop the military conflicts between Germany and the Allied nations, which was able to lessen the increasing losses faced by the country's economic and social stability. Although the treaty specified that Germany had to pay significant war reparations, which was approximately 33 billion in US dollars, there was ultimately no enforcement of that policy, and therefore allowed Germany's economy to recover for a period of time after the war. The treaty's final contribution of a degree of support for Germany was its role in the creation of the League of Nations, which was taken from US President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. It was able to establish a sense of global cooperation between European nations and further reduce the potential growth of full-scale conflict after the war. Even with these positives, Germany still had the most punishments imposed on it. One of those negatives was the reduction of the German military to only 100,000 personnel, all of which had to be voluntary rather than conscripted. Factories were also prohibited from making military vehicles such as submarines and armored tanks as well. These restrictions decreased Germany's military power and overall influence in Europe. The treaty required Germany to give up 10% of its territories, most of which would be supervised or be given to allied nations. The remaining territory would then be established as independent states such as Czechoslovakia, Finland, Poland, Hungary, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Yugoslavia. Arguably, the worst punishment for Germany was its admission to the war guilt clause, which held it solely responsible for the beginning of the war and the losses caused by it. This acknowledgement created mass feelings of humiliation and resentment among the population of Germany, and ultimately did not help in dampening feelings of social tensions between them and the Allied nations. The country's reaction to the treaty was largely negative, as citizens felt that the treaty was biased against them and that its terms of agreement were impossible for them to satisfy. Their main source of resentment was largely towards the war guilt clause, to which they believed to be humiliating and not true at all. Ever since US President Woodrow Wilson introduced his 14 points to Europe, which would have guaranteed less punishment on Germany, the country was shocked and massively disappointed at the treaty's lack of inclusion of most of those points. The population was so angered by the treaty to the point there were numerous protests around the country, both in the German parliament and on the streets as well, in the hopes that Germany wouldn't agree to sign it.
As we've seen, the Treaty of Versailles was heavily against Germany and led to the very harsh demands from the Allies. This caused the German government to completely refuse to sign the treaty, and they all resigned entirely. This, in turn, led to the complete political isolation of Germany from other world powers on a global scale. This sentiment was shown when Germany was not even included within the League of Nations. Actions such as this made Germany a political outcast, led to resentment towards other great powers from Germany. This resentment led to the German population being more inclined to support a radical ideology that might help them out of their impoverished state. This exact situation led to the rising popularity of fascism, leading us directly into the Second World War. Among these political effects were other short-term and long-term effects for Germany created by the Treaty of Versailles. Firstly, a large short-term impact from the treaty was that it forced Germany to specifically accept guilt for starting World War I in the war guilt clause. Germany felt that this was very unfair, as they believed that they were the sole reason as to why the conflict broke out, or they believed that they were not the sole reason as to why the conflict broke out. Germany also had to lose land to many new allied countries, such as France, Poland, and Denmark. Along with this, Germany had also had to decrease their standing army substantially. These short-term effects all culminated into German outrage for unfair treatment due to the Treaty of Versailles. This outrage led the German public to be more receptive to a radical approach of a solution to the problem, such as fascism, which we observed prior to World War I. The most significant long-term impact of the treaty was the resentment Germans faced due to the unfairness they felt from the treaty, causing them to resent the Allies. This resentment continued to culminate until World War II broke out, showing how the Treaty of Versailles indirectly caused a lot of the tension that created World War II. And then these are the pictures that kind of represent what happened to Germany. In the first picture, you can see how they lost many lands, obviously representing the short-term effects. While in the right picture, you can see how all these demands kind of culminated into Germany feeling like they were honestly too punished over the Treaty of Versailles.
There are a couple of changes to the Treaty of Versailles that can serve as better solutions to ending the conflicts between nations. One such change was to lessen the bias against Germany, in order to make the terms of the treaty more agreeable for both Allied and Central powers and lessen the tensions among the German population. Another change is to lessen the cost of the war reparations the country was required to pay, as the economic state of Germany at the time was in a bad place, and create less anger by allowing for the country to be able to financially recover and absolve the debt. The last major change was to not place Germany as the sole cause of the war, and instead shared the blame with all the Central Powers in order to have faster pay for all the damages caused by the war, as well as lessening the problems faced by the people in Germany.